So another clue for the existence of God is the question of morality. Where do morals come from? And also, why do we have a very strong sense of outrage, for example, when somebody tortures a child for fun? Why do we all agree that that is wrong? Where does our conscience come from? Where do fundamental human rights come from? So let's say that we don't believe that human rights are based on some primary foundation. How do we derive them? How do we derive the value, for example, of a human being? We could try chemistry, measure the value of all the elements. Perhaps if you have gold fillings, you're worth more than somebody that doesn't, but that seems silly. We could be a psychologist and measure how smart you are, but we don't think that's really the right way of measuring the value of humans. We could be a sociologist and see how many friends you have, but that's not really the right way of measuring either. We could be an economist and measure how much you produce, but that's not the right way of measuring humans either. All those different ways seem wrong. Somehow we feel fundamentally that we have basic human rights. And within a theistic framework, it makes a lot of sense that there are basic human rights, because those come not from something we've agreed, but they come from God, who has created us. The other clue about morality is the fact that we sense very strongly in our hearts that certain things are right or wrong. Those feelings can be very strong. They're shared across many, many cultures. And the question is, why is that? Why do we feel so strongly that it's wrong to lie? It's wrong to cheat. It's wrong to do bad things to other people. Well, within a theistic point of view, that makes sense, because we believe that God has placed that into ourselves and in fact into all people, whether they believe in God or not. And so that's a strand that fits in very naturally in a theistic point of view. And it fits a lot less naturally in a point of view that doesn't have a God at the center. Now, within a theistic point of view, if the world was created by a God of love, a God of justice, a God of peace, we would expect to have a sense of justice and a sense of love for one another and a sense of fundamental human rights. And so it makes a lot of sense in that perspective.
The other half of the problem about evil is moral evil, is that not only do we live in a world where there are natural evils and bad things happen, but there are people who do bad things. We know about this both on a local scale, on a historical scale, on an international scale. People have been responsible for doing awful things to other people. Theism has tended to cope with this, or to address this, by saying God has given us free will, that this is a universe in which we have free will, and if God was to intervene in our affairs, we would not be truly free, we would be robots, and there is no value in being moral automata, just clockwork devices who always do the good, that creating a universe like that has no value. The response really from a more atheistic position is saying, well, we understand we have to make moral choices, but does God really have to allow all of our choices to play out? Is it not possible for an all-powerful God to create a world in which we have some freedom, but also there are limits on our freedom which prevent the abominations of human evil with which we're all too familiar? And the worry is it really worth it to God? Is freedom that valuable that the awful things we see people doing to each other are a price worth paying? The atheist position on free will would be ultimately that free will is something we have, and that if there was a God, God would limit our free will, and that God wouldn't allow us to exercise it in quite such obscene a manner in relation to our fellow human beings. God isn't the only explanation for why people can be good. Whether we see morality as a construction of cultures, a result of humans living together socially, or a variety of other explanations for it, we don't necessarily need to invoke an all-powerful external authority figure. The strength of the atheist position in relation to, say, evil is that it doesn't provide a metaphysical explanation that somebody outside of the world is responsible for evil. It says we live in a harsh world where bad things happen and where we have complete freedom to do as we choose. And that is the reality we have to accept first. That's the first step, is to say this is what the world is like. Then beyond that is room for a more positive atheist response that says, given that that's the reality, given that we come to an acceptance of that, and that no one is going to solve our problems for us, and the world is never going to be absent of suffering, what are we going to do now? How do we collectively, as communities, societies and nations, start to build a response to that? How do we find our own morality? What do we value? and how do we embody that value, and how do we live it. And in that sense, once you get past the burden of the world being meaningless, there's room to make meaning, to make value, and to make morality. But it means that we are the engineers of our own ethics, and that whatever morality in the world is our responsibility, but is ours to shape.